In this episode, we speak to Andrew Craddock, a highly experienced practitioner, consultant, trainer and mentor, specialising in agile approaches to manage business change. We'll find out how the Agile Business Consortium define business agility, as well as what business agility means in practice. Andrew explains why business agility is such a valuable framework in today's climate. In Andrew's words, if you have a project that will take 5 years to execute, you cannot possibly know where the world is going to be in 5 years' time. The storm of change has grown, and organisations need a way to react to maintain a competitive advantage. Andrew also discloses why business agility has only recently moved into business as usual activity, the elements of the framework, and what we can expect from the Agile Business Consortium moving forward. If you want to learn how organisations can become stronger by becoming more agile, listen on. Welcome to this episode of Implementing Best Practice in Business. We're here to help you and your organisation understand and implement global best practice to help you face the business challenges of today. Join me, Richard Pharro, CEO of APMG International, in talking to leaders and practitioners who have applied these frameworks and practices to boost their productivity. They're here, willing to share their knowledge and experience to help you learn from them so you can do the same to make you more competitive in today's market. My guest today is Andrew Craddock. If the age of Agile can be said to have started with the publication of the Agile Manifesto back in February 2001, Andrew has seen it all. He's been deeply involved in Agile development since the beginning. Trained and assessed by the co-creator of Scrum, Ken Schreiber, he was one of the first cohort of Scrum Masters in the UK. Andrew is the co-author of the internationally recognised Agile PM framework for Agile project management, which is probably the world's global standard. He's an enthusiastic member of the leadership team of the Agile Business Consortium and has played a key role for the last 20 years in various positions within the consortium and at various times chair. His professional passion, though, is to take Agile beyond its roots in IT into the wider context of business agility. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
So, Andrew, how does the Agile Business Consortium define business agility? Is there an easy explanation? Is there an easy definition?
Well, interestingly enough, we actually had a couple of workshops very recently to try and crystallize a definition. We found that most people in the consortium had their own idea of what it was, and it was pretty similar in most cases, but we hadn't actually crystallized it into a formal definition. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and look at my notes because it's very fresh and I haven't committed it to memory yet.
Well, I think it's been a workshop, and this is the prescribed wisdom. I think it's right that we get it right.
Yeah. So it's a people-centered, organization-wide capability that enables value delivery to a world characterized by increasing volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, by inspiring and harnessing collaborative, creative ways of working. So it is just under 50 words, or it should be.
That's a high mark to live up to.
Yeah, indeed. And it really sort of focuses on two things. One of which is important, increasingly important to businesses, which is this ability to thrive and survive by being able to adapt quickly and decisively to changes in the business environment. And the other element brings in the collaborative, creative ways of working, the people-centered part. The notion that you're much better to have multiple brains applied to any problem rather than expect one brain at the top to be doing everything and just telling others what to do.
It's interesting, but haven't truly successful businesses always been agile to a certain degree?
I'm not sure that's true, actually. I think it is true of smaller businesses, most certainly, but what we've seen over the last 30, 40, 50 years has been this bigger fish eating smaller fish. The idea of the economies of scale and that sort of thing. Bigger and bigger organizations, and you only have to look at the impact of the pandemic in the last couple of years to see how quite often it's those bigger chains of retail shops, for example, that are the ones that have gone under. They haven't been able to adapt. They haven't been able to be creative enough and to roll out, if they have been creative, to roll that creativity out across their organization. Whereas you look at your sort of mum and dad corner shops, those are the ones that have survived.
Interesting.
Because perhaps two things. One is there are less people to get involved in the change to adapt. So that's a good thing. The fewer people there are, it's a small fish turning rather than a big tanker turning. And the other one perhaps is about the passion and commitment to that. So people are going to be more passionate, committed, engaged with their own business than they are perhaps with, as part of a 700,000 other people in that business. So I think that that mindset is what's really important, and culturally trying to harness that is important. So you look at some big organizations where they are hidebound, probably is worth saying, with procedures and things like that. So you have a whole load of procedures. You treat the employees who are in call centers or wherever it might be as drones reading a script. You're not providing the ability for them to think and respond to what they're hearing on the other end of a telephone or from a customer. And you get this sort of computer says no sort of mentality, even if those words aren't used to you as a customer on the end of a phone to a big bank or something like that. You certainly feel that there's something going on.
That's very interesting. So is it fair to say then that agility is more an attitude, a behavior, rather than a set of processes? So it's more about the individual being willing to be agile rather than the organization having a prescribed approach to being agile.
I think so. It's certainly more about that. I think there is still a need for processes, but in an agile environment, those processes tend to be much lighter. They tend to frame and guide people rather than sort of lead them by the nose down a very narrow path.
So I know Agile's been around in project management probably for the last 20 years or so. I think when you wrote the Agile Project Management Guide together with others, it was probably about 12, 15 years ago. Why is Agile really only now moving into the wider business area? Or have I misunderstood that? Is Agile really focused in projects and struggling to get into other parts of the business? Or are you seeing it already in other parts of the business?
So again, that's another really interesting question, and I think it brings together two things, to be honest. It brings together the fact that the world is becoming increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and that has had only more recently has had an impact on businesses as a whole, perhaps. With the onset of the sort of the digital era as well, certainly in terms of projects involving IT, the realization that it was all virtual, it was really easy to change something, tweak a line of code and you could change the behavior of a system that easily. That sort of flexibility and versatility within technology really sort of caught on, and people realizing that actually we can change our mind here. We've spotted this change. We can adapt what we're asking for to achieve that. Was actually what led to the problems with the more traditional way of running projects. So the traditional way of running projects basically relied on a predictive process based on an assumption that the problem you're trying to solve is going to be stable.
And the environment in which you're solving it is going to be stable.
Indeed. And the back in the, I don't know, let's say the sort of 1970s, go back to the 1970s and the dawn of IT, really. Yes, the world was changing. The world has always changed over its over history, but that pace of change has been growing. I don't know whether it's exponential, but it must be close to that. Since that time at least. And in the world of projects, which is a smaller world, it's easier to be buffeted, if you like, in terms of change. And people with the right entrepreneurial motivations actually saying, if we make this change, we can serve a customer better.
Mm-hmm.
So the motivations were there, and they conflicted with this idea of a stable problem domain, right? So we ended up in a position where, the dawn of IT really challenged traditional projects, and the creation of software, which had been likened to, building a bridge or something, in the early days, realized it was completely different actually to building a bridge. If you're building a bridge, you don't suddenly say, actually, rather than landing at that point on the other riverbank, we want to land 100 yards up or 100 meters up the bank. Or actually, you know what, instead of carrying people across this bridge, we'd like to put a train across it. Those sorts of things, almost impossible to adapt quickly in a engineering construct, but much easier to do in software, in reality. So getting back to your question of why is it only recently sort of becoming of interest in businesses as a whole, I think stems from the fact that the storm of change has grown and grown and grown and is now buffeting whole organizations rather than just bits of organizations. And that is why I think organizations are looking to be able to react more in a more agile way within their environment to maintain their competitive advantage.
That's quite interesting. So do you think that that's the death knell of the 3 to 5 year business plan? Do you think the business plans are now going to evolve into something that is aspirational, but we're going to change the way we work? We're going to be much more adaptive. We're going to be much more flexible in terms of what we do. And are you seeing any of that evidence among the members of the consortium? Are you sort of hearing that from the organizations that you talk to?
I haven't actually spoken to sort of people in organisations recently to understand it. I, as well as being involved with the consortium, I also run my own consultancy business, and in that business, I've worked with a number of clients over the last decade, where I've just observed the process they go through, their strategy process, their 5-year plan idea, as futile, to be perfectly honest. You cannot know where the world is going to be in 5 years' time. You just can't know. And as is the same with projects moving to an agile way of working, if you've got a project that's going to take a year, for example, so can you be sure what the state of the world is going to be in a year's time? And the answer is no. And one of the reasons, therefore, that you adopt an agile approach is to say, okay, well, we know what it is we want to achieve. We know the big picture of our ambition. And I think, therefore, I like that phrase that you used in terms of strategy. Yes, an organization can have an ambition to achieve something over a 5-year period. Brilliant. But the idea that you can plan this out in a regimented way over 5 years, given that by the time you get to the end of year 1, it's going to be a very different world to the one we're in today, seems a bit of a folly. So we're actually, the consortium's just embarking on some work around agile strategy. We've got as you are probably aware, we have our framework for business agility. Framework for business agility includes, as one of the sort of key influencers, strategy. and needing to deal with strategy in an agile way. So we've just started some work on that. It's early days, but the key thing is to make the process of defining your strategy and therefore refining your strategy on an ongoing basis as easy to achieve as possible. So you don't have this idea of a workshop spanning 3 months that come up with a 5-year plan. You actually condense that into we'll have a workshop for our 5-year plan, and then we'll think in more detail what we're going to do in the coming year, and then in even more detail what we're planning to do in the next 3 to 6 months. And we expect every few months, maybe even more often, depending on the precise nature of the business that's doing this strategy, to really sort of understand how the world's changed in the last 3, 6, 1 maybe month, and determine whether the strategic direction is still right. If you've got a broad ambition, the chances are that won't change in the in a 3, 6 year, 2-year period, but it might. But assuming it doesn't, it's all about how that's achieved, and that's where the sort of dynamic aspect is needed to cope with the change in the world in that period of time.
That's fascinating, but it does actually throw up some huge challenges, doesn't it, for some big organisations? So if you take that concept, if you decide that you need to increase your production capability within a market, once you made the decision that you're going to have to build a factory, that's a multi-month project. These days with modularization, it could be quite quick, and there's not a lot goes into. You could build the shell of the factory without equipping it. But once you've actually made the decision to build the factory, you are committed to get to a point where there is some value from whatever you've done. So do you end up with organizations having some multi-month or multi-year activities that are towards their aspiration, but then there's some smaller activities around it that you can flex? So, you could build the factory, but then within the factory, you might change what the product is you're going to build in that factory. Or you might partner with somebody else to use the factory for something else, that sort of thing. So it really has not a 2-speed thought process, but it has a 2 timescale thought process about things we've got to commit to. Because if we are serious about that aspiration, we're going to need this. But actually, if things go wrong, if the market changes significantly, do we have a plan B where we can put it to a different use?
Absolutely, and I think as you were sort of making your point there, Richard, I've got something in the back of my mind, which is a case study I read a long time ago now, but I believe it was Honda and Yamaha in the motorcycle business, and I'm not a big sort of motorcycle enthusiast, but one of those players had a real dominance. The other one wanted to come into the market, and it was assumed that they would go through a long, relatively laborious process, certainly a long-winded process, to build their capability to take on their competitor in a significant way. What the competitor did, what the newcomer to the market did, though, was actually have a strategy of disruption. So they went into this rather than saying, right, we can compete in an equal way on equal grounds. They had the notion of disrupting the market, introducing new things, and I think they turned if I remember rightly, they turned the wisdom of manufacturing almost on its head. So whereas their competitor had 3 or 4 or whatever it was models of motorcycle, they came into the market and they were releasing half a dozen motorcycles a year. So the idea of sort of big regimented production line type thinking was disrupted by we might only build 100,000 of these. Then we'll move on to the next one. And that sort of disruption was what allowed them to succeed and compete in that market. So I think the trick is to blend those things, as you say. The lead time to build a factory is going to be the lead time to build a factory, and the investment needed will be that investment. But what you do with it and how you bring it online and things like that, and what can you do to deliver value early in that process is, I think, needs to be the focus of strategy. That gives you that ability to shift and I at least respond to the market, but hopefully lead it and introduce disruption and make it the challenge of the incumbent players to have to adapt to the disruption that you're causing.
That's interesting. I mean, I've always thought of marketing being pretty agile because, you can start a campaign, you can change the campaign as you go through it. But yeah, agile HR, do you have any thoughts on whether it is possible to be agile in HR?
So that's quite interesting. I think the some of the processes within HR, for example, around recruitment, tend to be quite dynamic. Yep. So responsive. We've got a role here needs filling. We need it filled. It's not a case of, oh right, well we'll get somebody in 2 years' time. It has to be filled in short order. However, other processes around HR tend to be quite cumbersome. They tend to have actually quite dubious value. So
like the annual appraisal,
for example, and witnessing companies. So these are companies that I have in the past done some sort of degree of business with, hearing about some of the behaviours in their HR annual review policies, where, for example, we're trying to promote agility within the organization. Part of that says it doesn't matter what your specialist skill set is. It's about mucking in with the team as a whole to deliver value and to deliver value as efficiently as possible. And you know what? I'd rather you came and helped out. I don't know, you're a business analyst, for example. I'd rather you came out and helped with some testing than sit there twiddling your thumbs waiting for the next thing to analyze, right? So we sort of instilled that sort of philosophy within a team. The team was delivering very well. In this case, it was a business analyst, went for their appraisal, and they were marked down for doing things that were beyond their role. And you look at that and think, what planet is somebody, this HR person who's running this appraisal on, if they would put you are not conforming to your job specification above delivering value to a customer? It's really quite strange. So I think agility in HR that is focused around inspiring and enabling and promoting agility within the individuals, within the humans they are resource managing, makes a hell of a lot of sense. So yes, change is needed within HR to allow that to happen.
That's a fascinating story, because I can remember I worked for a consulting engineers many years ago when you still had draftsmen and you had drawing boards. And there were 2 draftsmen in a department, and one of them would do anything to help the engineers, so much so that, they would go and get lunch, they'd make tea, those sorts of things. And they were a highly valued member of the team. The other one was a job's worth, and it was, I don't start till 9 o'clock and I finish at 5:30 and I only draw, I don't do anything else. And when they had to look at reducing the team size, because the person that went was the person that helped everybody else, and the person remained was a draft, and the productivity and the morale within the team went through the floor. So, long time ago, maybe an early example of that agility within the team is about how do you make the team more successful rather than how do you just do what you're there for.
Absolutely
Fascinating. Yeah, I can understand that example of agility within, say, HR, about making everything more relevant and more valuable to the organization. But what's the consortium's role? What role are you playing in this whole movement towards business agility? How have you set your stall out for the aspirational long term, and how is the stall looking in the short to medium term?
That's another really good question. And one of the things we did as a board of directors a number of years ago, you mentioned right at the beginning, agile project management and that sort of thing. That was really what the Agile Business Consortium, or the DSDM Consortium, as it was called back then, did. We were about methods. We were about our own brand of method. The consortium was formed by a group of quite big companies back in the late 90s who were struggling with IT-based projects, that were running over budget, over time, not satisfying the business need, and all of that. It has changed. But what's really interesting, though, we're talking about the sort of dynamic nature of the world. The world has got a hell of a lot more dynamic. So sometimes now you look at it and think nothing has changed. If things genuinely hadn't changed, then we'd be in a real problem right now. But that's what the consortium did. And back in 2016, 2017, around then, we started looking at diversifying away from that and thinking, the wisdom that is built into agility in projects and agility in product development has a place in the wider world of business. And that actually got us thinking about how we could achieve that. I actually went through a pretty tough patch myself back then, and I've been working with organizations trying to help them become more productive and responsive, more agile, and we're finding that I was working with projects and project teams and that sort of thing, doing lots of things with them, allowing them and helping them become more agile, only to find we kept hitting a brick wall. And that brick wall was around corporate processes. And the corporate processes were stifling the agility within those teams. And I came off the back of one particularly pointless engagement with a client who genuinely didn't understand what agility was. They thought it was some way of cracking a whip in a special way that allowed people to do things quicker and better, which it isn't. And I actually thought, I've had enough of this. I genuinely thought, I've had enough of this. I think I might just jack this in and go and drive a bus, and I that was honestly was going through my mind. And it was at exactly that point that we realized, as the Agile Business Consortium, we could take this agility wider in the world. And I thought, well, you know what? If we can do that, if we can really bring the message and the wisdom of agility to the management of an organization, to the boardroom of an organization, then that will start bringing down those barriers. So rather than sort of hitting your head against a wall, you might still have a fight, you might still have a struggle, but at the very least, if top-down agility is understood and bottom-up agility is being practiced genuinely, then it could sustain significant change. So that's what really led to the thinking around this. And it led from there to the creation of our framework for business agility. Sounds like a fabulous endeavor. It wasn't, because the framework for business agility is incredibly light. It really just defines areas of focus. So and those areas of focus include things like culture, leadership, strategy, governance. So all of those things which were getting in the way of teams being agile, we're saying we need agility in those things in order to allow agility at the coalface.
Andrew, fascinating talking to you. Many thanks for finding time for this podcast. I'm sure things are very, very busy at the moment with everything that's going on within the consortium. So thank you very much.
It's fair to say they've never been busier, but I always love for anything I can do to help spread the word. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Richard.
Thank you for listening. We're always keen to hear your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. You can find all the information in the show notes below. Please visit apmg-international.com to find out more about our accredited training and the certifications that support them that are related to the topics discussed in this series. I hope you've enjoyed today, and I look forward to you joining future episodes while we continue our exploration into best practice and the benefits it brings to global business. Thank you.